Hello.
Our story begins deep inside meditation on the steps of the Jedi Temple. Qui Gon Jinn was tired, restless even. Sleep hadn't been the same since he lost his sight. He didn't have the privilege of seeing colors nor silhouettes. It was a complete blank slate of darkness. It engulfed his sight in a world of nothing. He didn't hate it, nor did he resent his failure. He just wished to understand it. His promise to young Skywalker still had to be fulfilled, but how could he be a teacher again if he didn't even understand himself? Qui-Gon remembered how it all happened, as his body twitched on the ground now. His old knees were firm in their place, but his shoulders tensed, remembering the very last seconds of sight. It flashed inside of his mind's eye, and he reflexively pulled back, opening up his eyelids to nothing. Coruscant's vast and beautiful cityscape sat just before him. With his natural senses, he could hear the sound of evening traffic, people all going home to enjoy the night with their loved ones before beginning the trek to work the next day. The buzzing of shuttles always tickled the right part of his brain. Being that Qui-Gon was from Coruscant, all of these sounds were homey and familiar to him. He could feel the wind brushing against his face and through his hair. The soft touch was just enough for him to release the tension building in his brow. Qui-Gon continued, letting the natural industrial smells pour into his soul. He was born far below the surface of Coruscant City. He knew many worse smells than this. His past led him to enjoying the smells on the top side of the city far more than most people ever would. Even though he couldn't see the skyscrapers and the buzzing traffic or the people floating by to their individual destinations, he could still imagine it. How many times had he, as a Padawan, knight, or master, returned to this very spot to find peace? It wasn't easy getting here, though most things hadn't been easy in the 3 weeks since he lost his sight. Qui-Gon was still trying to get a grasp on walking, let alone the lack of sleep from the waking night terrors. He no longer had the responsibility of training Obi-Wan. His student was a knight now. So it left Master Jin with a frustrating question. How could he, the blind Jedi Master that he was, instruct the Chosen One? The High Council awarded him with the opportunity because he managed to help apprehend the Sith Apprentice. Though any chance for gaining information out of Maul was gone, he suffocated himself in an attempt to escape the temple. By the time guards got the cell open, the Zabrak warrior was long dead. It was a choice of Maul's, not an order from Sidious. Jedi on the council wondered if his master instructed him to asphyxiate himself, or if it was an act of fear. They worried that Maul was so scared of his teacher that he willingly put himself out of any potential future misery he might face from him. It left the case of the return of the Sith even more cursed. Maul didn't wait to be rescued. He spent 72 hours contemplating the choice he wanted to make, and then he acted. The Jedi were going to try and save him too, but that was too late now. Qui-Gon could feel the agony in the decision. It wasn't easy for the 22-year-old Maul, and that was what broke Qui-Gon so much. He knew that Maul regretted considering it, but he still went through. There was a weight around the temple, and Master Jin wasn't sure if that came from his own personal loss of sight or the knowledge that the Sith did what he did to himself. Regardless of the case, Qui-Gon could feel it, some sense or edge of darkness that rippled through his peers. Jin pressed his hands to the ground, where a small wooden crane sat. It was a walking stick. He was still struggling to even sense his surroundings. The violence of the moment kept him from truly embodying the light he preached so heavily about. Qui-Gon was realistically stuck in the same place he lost his sight. He was only here on the steps of the temple, every day, trying to reconnect with the Force as he had taught it to Obi-Wan. Of course, Kenobi was considerate of his master and frequently around him, but Jin told Kenobi to free the boy's mother. With Anakin permitted inside the Order, and understanding that Qui-Gon might need space, Anakin stayed with the other younglings. This gave Obi-Wan a chance to establish a connection with Anakin by doing something that would positively impact his life. Qui-Gon knew he just needed to suck it up, deal with it head on, and try to face these demons. His hands stretched out across the ancient grounds of the temple's front walkway, and he committed himself to the Force. The Grand Master not too far from his position, stopped and watched, sensing the great irritation from such a commonly calm mind. Master Jin fell into the Force, feeling back to the moment he couldn't let go of. He foolishly trapped himself in a corner with Maul, and their lightsabers slapped away. He was holding on but growing continuously tired. Qui Gon tried to make the appropriate counter, and it didn't feel like he did. Yet the tragedy is, the only reason Qui Gon was alive was because he sacrificed his vision. Maul blasted the hilt of his lightsaber upwards, and Qui Gon rolled his weapon around, blocking the stab. The other side of Maul's saber sliced upwards across Qui Gon's cheek and across his eyes. He remembered seeing the crimson blade, and when it felt like it was over, he heard Obi-Wan's lightsaber ignite. Maul took just a few seconds too long to kill the Jedi Master. Qui Gon still kept himself protected from his opponent, just long enough for Obi-Wan to engage and defeat the Sith apprentice. Nothing mattered beyond that point. His vision was gone, and he couldn't be okay with it. Before Jin could abandon the temple steps, Master Yoda approached him. Because so rarely did a Jedi lose their sight like Qui-Gon had, but Yoda had seen many before who experienced the great loss. He promised Master Jin that with time it would become easier. Yet while he might feel like this is a limitation to his path as a Jedi, it might instead provide a clearer direction in life. Yoda was trying to be as accepting of Anakin as he could be, and he expressed that here, by telling Qui-Gon that perhaps young Skywalker needed a master who could see him wholly. Qui-Gon had already done an exceptional job at that, but training is more than just seeing the potential. Anakin might need to be seen by a blind Jedi, more than heard by seeing one. Yoda recognized how hard this might be for Qui-Gon, but he was among the best of the Order. If his words didn't help, then Jin would find another source of inspiration. The Grand Master continued on his walk, and before he could get further than a couple feet, Qui-Gon, with a few tears slipping down his cheeks, thanked Master Yoda for understanding. The little green Jedi smiled and simply continued on his walk. While Anakin's time with the younglings would continue, and his mother found residence inside the capital thanks to Obi-Wan, it didn't mean things got any easier for Qui-Gon. He was simply crossing things off his list that he knew needed to be completed. Shmi and Anakin's training were his priorities, which meant he couldn't truly face what he needed to, himself. Qui-Gon had to face the demons within, and it started by accepting the reality of his situation. He was blind. He couldn't just fix that. He was a Jedi. He needed to find harmony inside the Force and use his gifts to find success. Jin spent more time than he ever did before meditating in consecutive sessions. Whether it be inside the botanical gardens, outside of the Tree of Life, near the steps with another teacher, or elsewhere in public, it didn't help him. He was almost resentful that he failed to this extent. It never should have gotten to a point where Anakin's future was directly impacted by his failure to win a battle. The complacency of the Jedi Order to not see the return of the Sith irritated him. Things that weren't even related to his failure got under his skin, and it broke the foundational values that separated Qui-Gon from so many of his peers. He was disappointed in so much, and it was cutting him off from not only the Force and his connection to it, but himself. This wasn't a conscious decision. His bubbling over frustrations were causing the disconnect. It upset him greatly. He knew he was better than this. He was Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn, apprentice to Dooku and Yoda, master of Obi-Wan and future instructor of the Chosen One. He was saddened that he had to make up excuses to forgive whatever he was upset at. His focus determined his reality, and because his mind was so chaotic, so was everything else around him. In the span of a month, he went from teacher to student again. Obi-Wan's continued help made a sizable difference, but if Qui-Gon wanted to see change, it needed to come from within him. He had to accept that he failed, that he lost the lightsaber duel to Maul, yet he also needed to realize that no one is invincible, not even a Jedi. He had to accept what his reality was, and that everything he preached about the Force was the basis of his existence now. He couldn't blame anyone or anything. Qui-Gon could feel what he needed to change, but it still felt impossible. And it hurt him greatly that everyone could be there for him. Everyone. but his own master. From Master Windu to Anakin Skywalker to Jocasta Nu or Terrace Danube, there was always a Jedi trying to help him. Again, no one could do the hard work for Master Jin, so he needed to find the answers himself. On the other hand, was the individual who should have been there for Qui-Gon. Dooku, without mourning the loss of his student, still went to Sidious's lair to prepare for their plan to move into action. With Plagueis and Maul dead, it was Tyrannus who took the position of Sith Apprentice. His role had become irreplaceable, and he knew that. Dooku went to his master after being trailed by a curious Master Yaddle and killed her as Sidious instructed. Tyrannus was not prideful in this, but he was making the sacrifice for the greater good of the galaxy. He bought into a lie, and even though Qui-Gon was alive, Dooku believed he could turn his former apprentice to the dark side. This meant that for multiple weeks into months, that Qui-Gon suffered in the isolation of the void. His master was going out and starting up a confederacy. Since Palpatine had become Chancellor, it was Dooku's turn to hold up his end of the deal. Yet, he'd be lying if he said that he wasn't thinking about his former student all the time. Qui-Gon meant a lot to Dooku. He was like a son to him in many ways, and here he was, doing absolutely nothing to help him. Dooku from Sereno would make quiet dispatches for Qui-Gon, but they never received any responses. This wasn't Qui-Gon being mad with his master, because he simply stopped using his communicator after he lost his sight. Dooku didn't know that, so he just assumed that Jin had become disgruntled with him. It was hard for Dooku to be separated from Qui-Gon in this capacity. They'd always been so close, even though Dooku never had the chance or gave time to meet the Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi. Despite now Count Dooku trying to make contact with his apprentice, Qui-Gon never caught wind of any of these attempts. He was determined to change his reality, and it started with the least likely of methods. Qui-Gon loved to instruct. It was one of the things he loved most about being a Jedi, so he went to the boy, Anakin, to teach him when he wasn't in session with the other younglings. Anakin was obviously very grateful to Obi-Wan for saving his mother. It changed his entire perspective of the Jedi Order, but he was still a little disappointed that he didn't see much of Qui-Gon. Anakin knew that he needed to be patient because of Qui-Gon's new injury, but he still wanted to be around someone he trusted. That's where these after-class sessions came in. Master Jin was destined to become Anakin's teacher, no matter what, so he would get a jumpstart on their master and apprentice relationship. It'd be important for Anakin to form a stronger connection with his future instructor. Skywalker had a hard enough time adjusting as it was, so there was no need to make things any more challenging by not being present. As Qui-Gon hoped, these sessions would be very cathartic for him. Similar to how he was like Dooku's son, Anakin became like his own. It wasn't always like that with Obi-Wan, despite how much Qui-Gon cared for him. But Anakin needed someone like Qui-Gon far more than Obi-Wan did. Kenobi was always trusting of the Jedi path, and would always succeed inside of it, regardless of what Jin taught him or didn't. Anakin really needed a strong father-like figure in his life, which is what Jin was. Though it should be said that because Qui-Gon didn't want Obi-Wan always worrying about him, and due to Obi-Wan not being Anakin's future master, there were some other changes for Kenobi's fate that also benefited Skywalker. Thanks to returning to Tatooine to free Shmi and bring her back to Coruscant, where she currently resided, Obi-Wan developed a deep desire to make change on Tatooine and in the Outer Rim. He understood how they couldn't technically fix everything, but he still wanted to try. It was impossible to remain idle when he saw the conditions in person. When he was last there, it was just like any other case of slavery, but as a Jedi, he needed to be less cold about it. Due to the Council maintaining a high respect for young Kenobi, they willingly dispatched one of their own to accompany him, and a dozen knights to Tatooine. Master Yariel Poof wanted to participate in the liberation of slaves inside of Hutt territory, and especially since Yaddle had gone missing, it was important for the Elder Counselor to try and bring hope back to the ranks of the Elders. Main point being that Anakin saw the Jedi going back to Tatooine to make an impact, and sure, he may have not been permitted to be with his mother all the time, but he could still visit her per Qui-Gon's word. Though, All of this didn't directly change how Master Jin felt internally. Teaching Anakin, giving him time with his mother, giving him important lessons on the Force, or using a broken stick or the Jedi path may have felt good, but his mind was still a chaotic mess. He couldn't get past it. There was a block in his head, something simply preventing him from letting go of his vision. It felt so selfish when it never was. For Master Jin, it was a continuous cycle, one where he blamed himself for losing, remained frustrated that he couldn't harmonize properly, and then he would gaslight himself in various ways that led to even more internal agony. He'd always been so close to the Force, and he felt so cut off from it. This was the first time he was challenged like this, and he just wished he could feel the Force how he always had. It wasn't just the frustration of losing that connection, but also the sheer despondency that came with it. As the Separatist movement formed with systems showing interest in Dooku's propositions for a confederacy, he also grew increasingly worried for his student. He was a Sith now. He killed a Jedi counselor, so he shouldn't be showing interest in the Jedi. But his apprentice was his boy, and he hadn't heard from him. He worried if he had come to really accept that Qui Gon needed to die with the Jedi Order. That was unfathomable to Dooku. Not even he was sure if he could go through with the Sith plan if it meant that Qui Gon would die for it. He just couldn't picture watching his student die to clones in the coming decade. So without informing his master, he quietly, using an unregistered vessel, departed from his castle. Thanks to some droid aides inside of his home, it wouldn't ever appear that he left Sereno. When Dooku cautiously returned to the Jedi Temple, he searched for his student. It was nighttime, middle of the evening even. The Coruscant summertime winds were beating across the side of the temple, leaving audible humming and a creaking throughout the exterior corridors of the structure. When Dooku eventually found his apprentice, his heart sunk. Qui Gon was standing alone, without his walking stick, at the edge of the temple. He was outside, on the walkway that went around the building, in front of a 100+ story drop. The Jedi only wore his basic bedtime sleeping tunic. He was unable to sleep again. His memory, as it had been for months at this point, continued to replay the loss he experienced on Naboo. Now, to clarify, Qui Gon wasn't gonna hurt himself. He wasn't that despondent, but he was desperate for connection to the Force. He was teaching Anakin, and the more he taught, the more he felt like he forgot. It was so hard for him to feel this growing power beside him in Anakin, becoming more invested and interested in the Force while simultaneously feeling like he was losing his own grip on it. Qui Gon was not a controlling man or an envious one either. He knew that he had no control over the mystical power that held the galaxy together, but he felt wrong. Dooku immediately asked Qui Gon what he was doing, startling the Jedi Master. Jin jumped a little, before turning back and asking his master where he had been. A white cloth circled Qui Gon's head, covering his damaged eyes from being visible to anyone else. But the scar left behind by Maul still slipped down the side of his wrinkled face. Dooku winced when he looked at it, but he didn't say anything. He told his apprentice that he'd been trying to contact him, asking if he was doing alright. Qui Gon nodded, simply confirming that he just wanted to reconnect with the Force. It'd been difficult since Naboo. Everyone moved on. Obi-Wan was a knight, working on Tatooine. Anakin was studying hard inside of his classes and actually making friends. The people of Naboo memorialized their fallen and started to rebuild, and here he was, frustrated and lost in the echoes of his own mind. His brain was a prison made up of his own limitations. Dooku's mouth hung open for a moment, and he could feel his eyes creasing to a dissatisfied squeeze. He abandoned Qui Gon to this fate. Dooku would willingly make the galaxy wait to make sure his apprentice was alright. He walked a little closer to Qui Gon and put his hand on his shoulder, and he apologized for not having been there for him. Dooku's mind flashed back to Yaddle's dead body on the ground, Sifo Dyas's ship burning up in the atmosphere, and the hiring of Jango Fett. His apprentice was suffering, and he was adding to the pain in the galaxy. He promised Qui Gon that he wouldn't abandon him again. His apprentice displayed a weak smile. He told Dooku that he didn't need to promise that. He understood that there were other responsibilities. Dooku responded with a very frail acceptance of such mentioned other responsibilities. So instead of trying something else or taking Qui Gon from Coruscant, he suggested that they meditate together, and Jinn really liked the idea of that. The two of them knelt, facing the city, and slowly walked through a meditation together. Dooku took the charge because Qui Gon's focus still hadn't recovered. Yet there was a problem. Despite making the attempt to help his student, Dooku layered his meditation with dark-sided theories and concepts. All of his recent instruction with Sidious seeped through, and it didn't make anything better for Qui Gon. As is the way of the dark side, it is easier, more seductive. To a struggling Qui Gon Jinn, it was like a burst of life. But even Jinn didn't know that his master was intentionally misleading him. He could tell something was wrong with meditation. It didn't feel genuine. It was just something off, something missing. And while this didn't turn apprentice against a master, it certainly contributed to Qui-Gon's constant gaslighting of himself. How could he just ignore this spike of darkness trying to enter his heart? Did he truly lose himself when he lost his vision? What had he become? Once the meditation was over, Dooku returned to the interior, and Qui-Gon didn't leave the side of the structure until morning. Tyrannus thought he was making a difference, and instead, he was pushing his apprentice closer and closer to fully cutting himself off from the Force completely and intentionally. For weeks, Dooku would cycle on and off of Coruscant. He continued to work on the Separatist movement. The further into the dark side he got, the grayer and whiter his hair turned. He was looking older by the week. Sometimes his hair would just simply fall out. It was still slick and black, even in his 70s, but that color was fading quickly. He was working hard to turn Qui-Gon to the dark side, but Master Jinn was noticing habits and traits. These things weren't common from him. Sure, there were flashes throughout his life, but never such consistent insistency. It made the blind and vulnerable Qui-Gon uncomfortable with Dooku, but he remained focused on being there for Anakin. Then, after every check-in, Dooku tried to ask Qui-Gon to come back with him to Sereno. It might offer him a healthy chance to reconnect with nature. The vast jungles and fields of the planet were intertwined with the very Force itself. Maybe that could provide Qui-Gon a chance to experience life through a different lens than on Coruscant. At this suggestion, Qui-Gon requested for Anakin to be able to come along, with Obi-Wan too. It wasn't something Dooku was willing to allow, but he had to, so that he wouldn't drop any suspicions. Not for nothing, Tyrannus had become quite impressed with the young Jedi warrior named Kenobi. They were of the same lineage, but they never met. Qui-Gon thought that since Kenobi returned from Tatooine as a Jedi hero, that it might be beneficial for every member of their lineage to have time together, to reunite and meet. Dooku definitely could use the connection with his student and his grandstudents. To Tyrannus though, this was frustrating, but there really wasn't anything he could do about it. Because he opened his home up. Perhaps there was an opportunity to turn all three of them to the dark side. Sidious wouldn't be pleased obviously, but hopefully this entire situation could fly under the radar. Dooku already mentioned offhandedly, multiple times, that he wanted to bring Qui-Gon into the Sith to Sidious. The Sith Lord understood the sentiment, but everyone needed to have a purpose. Before Tyrannus existed, Maul and Plagueis each had a purpose. Their roles were defined, and a blind Jedi wouldn't offer the Sith much unless he actively hurt the imagery of the Jedi Order. Until there was something effective for Qui-Gon to do, Sidious remained hesitant on the surface, but resentful underneath it all. The Sith Lord considered a very likely scenario where he had to accept Qui-Gon into their ranks, and then have him killed within a month or two, just to push Dooku further to the dark side. It was a necessary sacrifice to ensure Tyrannus' future loyalty. Sereno was peaceful. Anakin enjoyed getting out of the stuffy Jedi Temple. Obi-Wan relaxed by reading reports on a holopad, while Qui-Gon continued his struggles with meditation in the courtyard. Dooku tried to remain patient, with the two young ones running around, but he was irritable at best most of the time. He continued his conversations with representatives interested in secession, and maintained a solid rapport with longtime Sith allies inside the Federation. It was a hard workday, and he brought Qui Gon here because he was willing to put in the extra time to turn him to the dark side. Though, just because Dooku was trying to save his student from the same fate as the Jedi Order, it didn't mean that Sidious wasn't aware of what Dooku was doing. There were hidden cameras all around the castle, and Sidious saw the other Jedi. He was also aware of Dooku's decision to sneak out of his own castle every now and again. His suspicions about Tyrannus were correct, though with Anakin Skywalker present on the planet, maybe this could be twisted to favor himself. Anakin was extremely vulnerable at his young age, and he could be swayed into darkness very easily. Palpatine just watched from afar, monitoring Dooku in secrecy to see what it was that Tyrannus intended to do. To Sidious's surprise, the Count genuinely wanted to save Qui-Gon by turning him to the dark side. Obi-Wan and Anakin weren't really of any concern to him, but their presence made working with Qui-Gon especially difficult, and the truth is, despite him trying to do what he thought was best for his student, it was realistically selfish. He may have thought that he was protecting Qui-Gon, but he was just trying to control him, which wouldn't solve any problems. Though because of the vast openness and vibrancy of life around them near the castle, Qui-Gon started to reconcile with the Force itself again. It was simultaneous. Dooku tried to coax Jinn into the spell of the dark side, while Qui-Gon fell into the arms of the living Force once again. This really was a battle between master and apprentice against the influence of the Force. It was so quiet and secretive too, which was the craziest part about all of it. No one aside from Dooku knew this was happening. He was just trying to influence Qui-Gon, and he, finally free from Coruscant, was finally finding the piece of him that he lost. What made matters even more funny was Obi-Wan and Anakin on the planet too. Young Kenobi took time to train Anakin with, yes, real lightsabers, per Qui-Gon's request. So when Obi-Wan wasn't on his data pad, he was inside the forest, working with Anakin on obstacle training and combat exercises. Younglings weren't supposed to get super involved with this, but Qui-Gon allowed it because Anakin really wanted to. It was a deal between the two of them. If Anakin performed well in his youngling studies and classes, then he could train with a lightsaber. If those grades slipped, though, he would lose access to the saber. Additionally, for the iPad kid himself, Kenobi, he was always on his datapad for a singular reason. Master Yarael Poof and himself built up a really strong relationship during their Tatooine missions, and he wanted to keep a close eye on the continued developments. Thanks to Master Poof, the Council was now closely monitoring the situation in Mos Espa and with Jabba the Hutt. There was a clear sign that the status quo had been interrupted, but ironically, the Hutts had no clue the Jedi were there. This wasn't the typical diplomatic approach of the Jedi Order. They were acting like mercenaries. They snuck around, took out Hutt sentries, slavers, and freed anyone they could. These were blood-pumping, high-adrenaline missions, something that fed Obi-Wan's young soul after he defeated Maul and saved Qui-Gon's life. It's part of the reason why he was so light inside of his mind. The burden of failing his master didn't bog him down. He knew Qui-Gon didn't blame him for the blindness, and he did whatever Master Jinn needed. So Obi-Wan was very happy-go-lucky about everything. That also irritated Dooku, but it provided a better relationship for Anakin to rely on while Qui-Gon was going through his bad days. Eventually, after a couple of weeks on Sereno, something clicked for Master Qui-Gon. It was another one of his sleepless nights, and he walked out of his bedroom, through the courtyard and into the forest. Naturally, his lightsaber found his hand, as he, for the millionth time, relived his duel on Naboo. Maul approached him through the underbrush, and their sabers connected. Qui-Gon could see every move, just as he had before on Naboo. And as the moment came, as he approached his last few seconds of sight, he for the first time let go. His saber, mid-swing, deignited, and fell to the forest floor. Maul swept forward and it was over. Qui-Gon felt the burning heat pass through his body and out of his back. Finally, after holding on so desperately to the mistake he made, everything connected. For the first time since becoming blind, did he not blame himself. A few tears even slipped from his eyes as he realized the truth about his actions. If Qui Gon didn't defend himself the way he had, he wouldn't even have a life to begin with. Not to say that he was grateful for being blind or that he should be, but it was a gift of life. He gave himself a second chance by deflecting the saber the way he had. Without it, he would have been dead. It was like a curse left his body as he made that connection. No longer did he only see darkness, he could feel shadows around him. Slowly, Qui-Gon pulled the white band from around his head off and opened his eyes. What he felt was real. His focus determined his reality, and it was proven right here. Qui-Gon couldn't see, of course not, but through the Force, he had insight. There were silhouettes and auras that he connected to. The trees, bushes, wildlife, and everything in between could be seen under the scope of an endless scape. He no longer was totally blind, and as it had been before, every single one of his friends could help him or try to at the very least, but he needed to be the one to do it for himself. Qui-Gon smiled faintly for a moment and thanked himself. He preserved his own life. He extended it so that he could instruct Anakin and enjoy the stories of Obi-Wan's life as a knight. This was a gift, the greatest gift he had ever been given. No longer could he judge the council for their actions because he now understood how deafening blindness could be. Not only was the physical turmoil he endured a metaphor of the actions of the wisest in the Order, but that of his own master. Though this didn't become apparent to Qui-Gon until after his first full night of rest since before the blockade of Naboo. In the morning, Qui-Gon rose, with his sleepwear tunics on. He joined Anakin and Obi-Wan for their morning training session. Skywalker was eagerly waiting with his saber, and Obi-Wan, still practicing Form 4, excitedly engaged with another training weapon. Qui-Gon stood with his arms crossed, and watched the silhouettes bounce across his vision. He was elated. Not only could he see his two students training together, but their auras were vibrant, bright and beautiful colors that perfectly embodied both of the students and where they were and what they felt. Obi-Wan with his blue lightsaber embodied an orange hue, representing his confidence, friendliness, and courage. All of these were felt just by being around him. Anakin, while using a green training saber, since he hadn't retrieved his own kyber crystal yet, was covered by a blue aura. Just like the accuracy displayed with Obi-Wan, Anakin's was tranquility, security, trust, and loyalty. His mother was free from slavery, and he had his blind master and inspirational older brother-like figure in Obi-Wan helping him out. They continued to train with their sabers bashing away. Qui-Gon's peace, though, was disrupted by the arrival of something different. Obviously, since he'd been blind both physically and spiritually, he never really picked up on Dooku's change, but now it was visible. He turned to greet his master, who he sensed for the first time from behind him, something he hadn't done since before the duel on Naboo. Dooku was taken aback a little, but not as much as Qui-Gon was. There were meshing hues, all of them displaying something darker and less recognizable from who he knew Dooku to be. There were hints of yellow, red, and purple, all identifying different negative traits of his master, such as instability, danger, and mystery. His master changed, and then he saw it, the ray of black that hid behind everything. It meshed with the darker sides of Purple's negativity, which was mystery, but depicted another layer of evil and death. Something about Dooku was different, and everything clicked. All of their joint meditations had been down the easy path, the one of darkness. Qui-Gon naturally was rejecting of these because he refused to embody the darkness, but his master was trying to force it onto him. Qui-Gon immediately reacted, no longer hiding behind the shroud of confusion nor blindness. He asked Dooku why he lied to him. Obi-Wan and Anakin continued to slash away at each other, not catching on to the confrontation behind them. Tyrannus' eyes flickered, as if something activated, a defense mechanism he'd been using since he was selected by Plagueis and Sidious. the Sith apprentice remained blissfully confused, playing the exact part he wanted Qui Gon to believe him as. But after being blind for so long, Qui Gon had no intention to close his eyes and pretend it wasn't real. That wasn't who Master Jin was, and if he had to expose one more Sith apprentice so that the last of the Sith could be revealed, then he'd make the necessary sacrifice again. The Jedi didn't mince his words when he explained to Dooku that he now understood the truth. All of their joint sessions had ulterior motives. He couldn't see it before because he was so desperately looking for an answer, but it wasn't until he let go that he realized he had it the entire time. He questioned because he didn't want to assume or accuse. Why did Dooku try and coerce him into the dark side? What did he have to gain from that? Surely Dooku knew better. Even if he disagreed with the Jedi, they were the closest to the light. They were the good guys. Dooku's jaw stiffened and a hint of yellow appeared behind his eye. Just like the aura, the yellow depicted a state of instability, of darkness. Tyrannus reminded his apprentice that the Jedi used the Force as a crutch to explain away all their hubris. They were a corrupt order that abused the concept of religion to remain in close contact with Republic leadership. If only he could see the truth. If only he listened, he would know why the Jedi were doomed. Dooku was simply trying to save his soul, and if Qui Gon wanted no part in that, then he'd be removed from Sereno and never speak to him again. Jin's smile, the one he gained from finally obtaining sight, vanished instantly. His heart ached, and the silencing of lightsabers behind them only told him that Obi-Wan and Anakin heard this too. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. What did Dooku mean by that? Why was he being so hostile towards his own student? That wasn't the Jedi way. Anakin called it out immediately, and Dooku silenced the boy, telling him that this was a conversation between master and apprentice, not some child who didn't belong. Obi-Wan put his hand in front of Anakin and placed himself just a step ahead. Dooku scowled at Kenobi, telling the boy to put his ego down for a moment and listen. He was trying to save them, and they were all ungrateful for his attempts. They constantly rejected the darkness. They constantly made his work harder, and there was nothing he could do to save them now. Obi-Wan turned towards Qui-Gon, who just sighed. All of his hard work for naught? Dooku's hard work was selfish. It reeked of the Sith. What happened to him? He was the pride of the Jedi Order, and now he was a jaded shadow because he disagreed with members of the High Council. He asked his master, Qui-Gon that is, if he really thought anyone disliked him, because no one did. People thought highly of him, of his opinions, and he trotted around like there was some imaginative target on his back. It wasn't just pathetic, it was frail. Qui-Gon told his master that the students would be returning to the temple, so that he could stay here in the silence and be miserable alone. The words cut deeply, and the wounds were really only visible on Qui-Gon. He regretted having to say that to his own master, but it was true. Dooku needed to hear it from someone he respected and thought highly of. Now he had, and it was up to Dooku if he wanted to do something about it. Upon their return to Coruscant, Qui-Gon would face the High Council and retell his scathing tale of Count Dooku of Sereno. He told the truth about a Jedi Master falling from grace, one trying to seduce his blind apprentice to the dark side and corrupt the Chosen One. These were offenses not punishable by death, but at the very least expulsion from the Jedi Order. The Council listened with disappointed ears as the full story was explained to them in great detail. At that, though, Qui-Gon would confess to his own slips into darkness. Due to Dooku, he felt the draw, and he understood the ease and seductiveness of the dark side. But Qui-Gon did not let it in. He remained strong and he persevered. The Council was very prideful of Qui-Gon because he had always been an exceptional student of the Force. His concentration on rebuilding himself from the ground up is why everyone thought so highly of him. Because if any Jedi could do it, it would have been him. This solidarity with the Force, found within himself, proved to be one of Qui-Gon's greatest feats in their minds. Though there was something that Master Jin was unaware of. He was a little late. The story was true, and it provided insight into the tale of their fallen comrade Count Dooku. But there was a missing piece. Tyrannus, betrayer of the Jedi Order, executioner of Master Yaddle, had confessed his sins. If Qui Gon or Obi-Wan challenged Dooku to a fight, they would have lost and probably died, but they turned around and left him in the silence of his own mind. He wanted so badly to be a Sith and to make the galaxy feel right, but Qui Gon proved through his actions that the darkness would never be enough to save the galaxy from itself. The dark side was simply easier and nothing more. Qui Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin avoiding that fight didn't just destroy Dooku's morale, it made him realize that all of it was for nothing. So Dooku, in his shame and regret for having deceived Qui Gon and betrayed his students' trust, did what he could to make things right. He exposed everything: the plot to destroy the Jedi with a clone army, the death of Sifo-Dyas, the murder of Yaddle, and Dooku's betrayal of self. It was hard for the Jedi to even refer to him by his name, because those were the actions of a different man, one named Tyrannus. The Dooku that everyone inside the council knew could never be so cruel. At this current moment, as was explained by Yoda, Tyrannus and Sidious were being shipped separately to the Spire at Stygeon Prime, beyond the Outer Rim. Unlike Maul, they would be withheld from self-officiation and forbidden from communication, though Yoda told Qui-Gon that if he wanted to speak to Dooku, he'd be permitted to do so. Qui-Gon held his hands together in front of his torso and shook his head with a shameful look. He knew it wasn't worth it. He understood that Dooku's last actions were everything he needed to hear and see. The fact that, through the darkness of Tyrannus, Dooku found himself, reassured him that his master would find peace. That's all that mattered to Qui-Gon, as long as, in the end, Dooku died as himself, the Jedi Master that instructed Jinn, and loved and cared about the Jedi, Republic, and people of the galaxy, then his transformation into the Force would be peaceful. It also meant that, when the time came, Qui-Gon and Dooku could reunite in the netherworld of the Force, the way they had always been prior to the invasion of Naboo. The raid on the Chancellor's office became a huge mystery to the Republic, but it didn't stomp out all the turmoil. Tension grew into frustration. There were planets that seceded, but not enough to build a separatist coalition out of. The Republic prevailed without war, and thought of a total galactic conflict never really came to people's minds. It was only a theory within HoloNet circles, but nothing else. After all of his struggle, Qui-Gon, as a fresh man, set his sights on training Anakin to the best of his abilities. And maybe Qui-Gon couldn't see Anakin with his own eyes, but he never needed eyes to see his apprentices. He fully understood his students, and Skywalker, as a result, had a remarkable development under Master Jinn's instruction. He and Obi-Wan would remain close through the years. Anakin even became close with Kenobi's students once he took on his own Padawan. As for Master Qui Gon Jinn, he finally accepted the calling to join the High Council. He didn't believe in the path before, but with his eyes more opened than ever before, he realized where he needed to be was with them. Qui-Gon had single-handedly removed the Sith from existence. Obviously he had some help along the way, but at the center of all of it was him. And thanks to his instruction, he prepared the leader for the next generation of Jedi greatness. Qui-Gon spearheaded its beginning, but Skywalker, with full development, no Clone Wars, and no Sith, could truly unite the Jedi and bring long and established balance and tranquility to not only the Order, but the Force as well. And that, my friends, is our story, and special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. Well, that Qui-Gon is a little edgy. Very intentional choices here done with Qui-Gon. I wanted you guys to kind of see Qui-Gon deconstructed. That was like the big motive I had going into writing this story, was just deconstructing Qui-Gon and like breaking him down. And I think that was I think that was accomplished in this story. And I thought this story would work more as a story about Qui-Gon than anyone else. I think everyone that makes a Star Wars What If has done What If Qui-Gon trained Anakin, and you do get a little bit of that in the story, but this is Qui-Gon's story, and it's meant to be that. It's not really meant to shoehorn anybody else into it except for him. And I thought it'd create like a really interesting dynamic if you have like a Kanan Jarrus-like version of Qui-Gon. I do believe personally that Kanan is the greatest Jedi Knight. He just embodies everything a Jedi should be, in my opinion. And so this is Qui-Gon kind of seeing that he wasn't right about everything. There are still some things that he has to learn, because no master, no matter how great they are, knows everything. And that's kind of Qui-Gon's journey in this, is he's getting to accept that he knows a lot, he's very intelligent, he understands the Force, but he is deconstructed to his roots again. He loses all of his connection, and at that, the person he should trust the most, Dooku, betrays him. Dooku is constantly layering his lessons and meditations with the dark side, and is just pushing Qui-Gon further away from the truth. But the reality is, and what it is in this situation, is that it's kind of seeing the glass half full. It's really kind of the motto of the story, is that Qui-Gon's looking at the situation for his loss of vision, instead of looking at it as, I saved myself despite losing my vision. I'm still alive, I can still bring Anakin to the Jedi Order and train him the way he needs to be trained. And so once he makes that connection, he starts being fully connected to the Force again, and even more so, where he starts seeing people for who they really are without actually seeing them. And it's kind of like this beautiful connection to the Force, like very much so how Kanan can see Hera at the end of his life. It's kind of like that, but he's seeing the silhouettes and auras of individuals rather than just fully seeing them with his eyes. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. I love you all. Spread the love. Always, my friends. May the Force be with you.